So my name is Paul Kingsford. I work with Bert, Chessin, and both of us, we started a non-profit called Bare Bones Historians. And we did that in response to what was a lot of anti-Semitic material that was handed around Montana. And what we did was we built a historical exhibit for local museums in this region. And it was on the most famous Jews that have ever lived in Missoula and the surrounding area. And when we started it, we didn't really understand what we'd start to find when we started digging around in relatives' attics. And what we also uncovered was some extraordinary photography of Native Americans mixed in with these photographs of Jewish people from the Victorian eras. And then it was only because we started digging further into them and finding out who these people were that we realized that there was a relationship between these first Jews when they came out there as merchants. So if imagine you're out in the middle of nowhere and you start a merchant business and you want to sell to people, and there's only so many European people coming through. The majority of people are Native Americans. So you're going to be selling your goods to those people. And it just so happens that the Jews that were coming from Europe were multilingual. And we believe what it was is that they quickly picked up the language. And so I think that struck a chord, I think, with many of those native peoples at the time. And hence, that's the reason why we believe we saw these photographs of Native Americans in these pieces. But that was the first book. That's the first presentation we did. I'm now in the midst of building another exhibit. And this one is around Jews during the Goldrush era. And this is really beginning to open the door to really some cool historical facts that we're beginning to uncover. That's part of my story. So the reason I call this From Gold to Granite, this exhibit, is because what I found was a common thread, is that these Jews, when they first came out here, they often, like many gold miners, scrambled around for gold. But I think many of the Jews saw it as an opportunity not to risk their lives looking for gold. It was better to go out there as merchants and mine the gold miners. It was far more lucrative. So the title's From Gold to Granite. It's the story of how Jewish pioneers helped turn gold camps into thriving metropolises. In the midst of the Civil War period of 1861 to 1865, the thought of striking rich gold deposits in the West was an alluring prospect. But for most, the chance of discovering gold would still prove to be a remote one. It did not, however, dissuade thousands of Easterners and immigrants from flocking to Elder Gulch in the place of Goldrush of 1863. The picture you see up above, there's a bank there in the distance. That was Jewish owned. It was the first bank in town at the time. And here, in the large building right in the middle there, that was established by Jewish people in the town too. So those are the two things I knew about that image. Just want to point that out. Anyway, the gold camps at Elder Gulch and Grasshopper Creek stretched for miles. And you can see this one here is, it's a picture of, I think this is Virginia. And you can see what it looked like. All these trees have been stripped away for construction of these buildings. And the whole thing's just literally dug up for gold. Go to the next image.
It's actually Virginia City.
Oh, did I not say Virginia City? Sorry. Anyway, many of these were veterans of Pikes Peak and Cedar Creek. And these Pikes Peak and Cedar Creeks, these are different regions, like from Colorado and all regions from Montana and California were all coming out here because Virginia City at the time, that was the hot spot for gold in the country. And at the time, you could see this wagon train here being pulled by mules. This was a common image that you would have seen out there in these towns, because this is how supplies were brought out. There were no roads. There were no, all you had was just a rough idea of where to go on a compass, and hopefully you'd eventually find the gold mining towns. Only a few Jews engaged in mining at that time. The experienced merchants had more chance of attaining success than the inexperienced gold miner who risked his life. And I just want to show you a map of what these, where these gold mines were. I don't know if anyone's familiar of what Montana looked like. This map is from about 1880. But you can see down here, I don't know if my cursor works. Can you see where Bannock is? This is this region here was where the first gold mines were, and in Helena, Virginia City, this is the other strike area. And the miners would travel between Bannock and Virginia City all the time. And just wanted to give you an idea of the distance. From the crow flies, it's 60 miles. But if you're traveling, it's probably like 150 miles. And this is Helena, the capital, which ends up becoming the richest gold field in Montana later on in the 1866 period. One of those first Jews to start a merchant business in Virginia City was Saul Starr. Saul made his way to Virginia City in 1865, where he operated a store for 7 years. In 1872, Saul was appointed by President Grant to be a receiver of the land office in Helena, which was an important position at the time. Seth Bullock, who would become his partner. Does anyone watch Deadwood on? Has anyone seen that show, Deadwood?
I imagine some people have.
Right. Well, Saul Starr was one of the main characters throughout the whole show. And Seth Bullock was his partner. Seth Bullock becomes the sheriff. Saul Starr was the mayor of Deadwood, and he held that position for 14 years. And since then, no one has ever held that position for as long as he has. So it's quite remarkable. This is just showing what Deadwood looked like. Deadwood, like all these gold towns at the time, were often burning down. And you could see why. You could see there piled in the fronts of the streets was all these piles of wood, which they used for their stoves. And it was quite common to see these stoves literally explode, burning the place down. This is, I don't know if you can see this, but there's Starr and Bullock's hardware store. And I believe it's Starr who's standing outside the front there in his white shirt. Oh, wrong way. Robert Stanley, he discovered gold in Last Chance Gulch in 1863, which is in Helena. A gold camp sprang up around it would later be called Helena, would be called Helena. And that town, I believe, Helena, was named after a wildlife Jewish lady from Virginia City. At that time, there were 17 dry goods businesses that were counted in Helena, and only 3 of them were gentle-owned. So it just gives you an idea of, at that time, there were probably around about 20,000 people, gold miners, that flocked to Helena. And considering that there were 20,000, at that time, there was only 80 Jewish people that were counted in Helena. And 17, when you consider that 17 of those dry good businesses that were Jewish owned, it just shows you how much they were contributing to the community. Anyway, after the gold began to play out at Grasshopper and Elder Gulch, Jews moved their business to Helena in 1865. Lewis H. Hirschfield opened a bank and merchant business in Bridge Street. It would be the first bank to function in Helena. So here you could see his bank in this picture, and you can also see he's also selling groceries out of the same facility. I think it was always a good idea to diversify at the time. Anyway, he started his bank business in Virginia City in 1864, exchanging gold for cash. And that helped save miners from losing their house. 1960s, the town was burning down all the time, and people were flocking, leaving the city, just losing faith. But the Jewish community started building these huge buildings out of granite just out of faith, showing to the town, we believe in this town. And look at this great big bank we've built here. That shows that we've got the faith in this town and we believe in the community. This is just a fun example here. In 1864, the rich gold strikes at Alder Gulch and Last Chance Gulch was attracting thousands of gold prospectors to Montana Territory. Counting among them was a gold seeker called Marcus Lisner. He devoted his time to mining in a place called Silver Bowl. In January 1865, he trekked to Grizzly Gulch, turning his attention to prospecting. After finding enough gold dust, he was able to open the Western Hotel, which would be one of those first restaurants in Helena. And that was at Main and Bridge Street. It's funny, all these Jews always end up on Main and Bridge Street. They can't all be on Main and Bridge Street, but that's what it says in these historical books. And here you just get an image of what it really looked like. It's one of the few actual surviving photographs of the gold mines during those early periods. It looked pretty hectic to me. Marcus Lisner was actually one of the few Jews that actually went out there who, although he had a merchant business and later he became a hotelier, he continued to mine gold. It was just in his veins. He just never stopped. And you can see from this photograph here, the fine hotel that he ended up building. In Montana, that was one of the finest hotels. It catered to anyone that was anybody who came to Montana during that period. This is where they stayed. So actors, actresses, this was the place to go and be entertained. And here in this photograph here is that brick building we see in the far right corner is the only surviving photograph I ever found of the actual hotel. And here you can see the rest of the town literally burned down. It's probably the only reason why that hotel survived was because it was made out of brick. Anyway, the lure of gold would eventually pull Marcus to Lincoln Gulch for just over a year. And he opened a billiard hall there and he returned to Helena. He opened a hotel which he operated before it too burned down. And that was in 1869. And Marcus Lisner, never one to have a fire preventing from success, would rebuild 2 more hotels on the ashes of the previous structure. Marcus opened the International Hotel, which is that picture that I showed you previously. And it was known in the community as the Phoenix for obvious reasons, because he just kept on rebuilding it. And this had 110 rooms. At the time that this 110 room building, you can see this brick building there, that was the largest hotel in Montana at the time. Anyway, the Helena Jewish community, the Helena Jewish residents began to provide some of the incentives the growing town needed for it to succeed. helping turn this rough gold camp into a functioning town. These Jewish merchants and bankers, ranchers would figure prominently in Montana's economic and social history. As businessmen and private citizen Jews served as important financiers and promoters of the community. And I don't know if we can allow Bert to interject here, but this is, Bert, could you give him permission to speak?
I'm on.
Hi, Bert. I just wanted to share this. This is the temple that was built. I think was it this 1880, Bert?
1890.
1890. And this
cornerstone was the governor of the state. Montana became a state in 1889, and the next year the governor of the state, Toole, helped lay the cornerstone for the synagogue there in Helena.
Right.
But the Helena community had come together even in the 1860s, as Paul showed the Hebrew Benevolent Society formed in the 1860s.
Yeah. And then I just wanted to point out that the Helena Board of Trade was established in 1866. And at that time, like I said to you, there was only between 40 and 80 Jewish people living in the town at the time. And this photograph is from 1867. That old photograph you see here, it gives you an idea of what it looked like. It's just incredible to me that, anyway, they started the Board of Trade at that time. And considering that there was about 20,000 people in that region, in that area there at that time, that these three Jewish, Abraham Sands and Moses Morris and Henry Klein, marked in blue, were on the Board of Trade at that time, I think is quite extraordinary. And they played a really important part in making sure that this Helena became the capital of the state of Montana. On the next page, I just wanted to show you, in 1860, there were 80 Jews. By 1870, there were only 42. And that was because at that period of time, people mined gold by what was called placer mining. And placer mining means basically what they were using was water, and they were basically just panning for gold. They were only doing small digs and basically just sifting through the dirt to find the gold dust in between all the gravel. And it was only in the 1870s that things started to change, because they then started mining for gold, and then they started crushing the rock and extracting the gold from in the rock pieces. So the mine started going deep, going hundreds and hundreds of feet, and that changed the whole dynamic then at that time. So that's why the population went down in 1870 and 1880. It started then to resurge by the 1880s. The population went to 165. But even then, after those gold mines, didn't last forever. And then the population in Helena started to go down again. And Jews moved, to Butte. It's one of those things. And that's pretty much the end of my little presentation. I just wanted, this picture here, above and below it, that's Main Street. And I just wanted to show you what it looked like in I believe that's 1867, one at the top. And at the bottom, that's 1880. It's the same street. It shows you the massive transformation that occurred over a very, very short period of time. And that's my presentation. I hope that works.
Thank you. These photos were amazing. I've never seen anything like this. And the fact that we can learn, Jews, as you said, Jews were really the main merchants, it sounds, even though there was just a few.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Especially in dry goods and tobacco, which are traditional Jewish enterprises.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for preparing that, Paul. It's great to start going to the origins before we get into today, which we will be hearing from Rabbi Francine Roston, who is the founder and rabbi of Glacier Jewish Community B'nai Shalom. So if you could go ahead, and Paul, and remove your screen. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
And then, wonderful. And Rabbi Roston, are you unmuted?
I think so.
Perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great.
So if you
Great,
just
well-
share a little bit about yourself, and then, introduce yourself.
You will hear about my story as we go through the presentation, and I am the rabbi for the Glacier Jewish Community B'nai Shalom. I went to seminary with your rabbi, Adam Klickfeld, and I was ordained by JTS in '98. Served conservative congregations in New Jersey for 16 years before moving out to Montana. My family actually first visited Montana in 2010, and we fell in love with Glacier Park. This is us in the park. My daughter there in the middle, she's now a college sophomore. My son is now a high school junior. But we came to Montana because we had been taking our family to national parks in the summers to get an experience of the outdoors, get out of the suburb city life. And we just really fell in love with the lifestyle of being outdoors. We fell in love with Glacier Park, and we fell in love with Whitefish, Montana. Just in case you don't know where Whitefish is, we're right up there, northwest Montana, in the corner of the state. This is a map of the state. Whitefish is at this upper edge of this circle over here. We're above Flathead Lake, and we have our own lake, much smaller. But this is downtown. This is really all of downtown. This is our main street with a view of Big Mountain. Whitefish is a year-round outdoor destination, skiing in the winter, hiking in the summer, hiking throughout the mountain ranges, as well as in Glacier Park. We are 30 minutes to the entrance, the west entrance of Glacier Park. Yeah, so we really loved being out west, being outdoors, and enjoy all the different activities. That's me at Avalanche Lake. This is my kayak at a lake that's down the street. And this is a view of Whitefish Lake from Big Mountain. That is not me in that little thing, because I'm scared of heights and I don't do that. I'll climb up the mountain many, many times, but I don't like that thing. My family really loves hiking in the park, and we, every year set the course for which trails we want to conquer. And really, everyone in our family fell in love with the area. That was my daughter and my son in Glacier, or daughter and my husband in Glacier. And this is my son. He worked one summer, volunteered in the Montana Conservation Corps. And the person who adjusted to life in Montana the quickest is our dog. That's our dog, Percy. He's a water dog, so he's ecstatic. That lake is just down the street, a few minutes. So we all fell in love with life here. We joked about moving to Montana. I started to just sense that I was feeling burnt out in my work. And my husband is able to work remotely. And so one time when we were joking, we just looked at each other and said, well, why not move? My son was finishing 5th grade. My daughter was finishing 8th grade, and it was the best time for our family. So this is actually the view from my home. This is my view washing dishes from my bedroom. This is looking east as well to Glacier Park in the middle of that mountain pass. We met the Jewish community when we visited. Probably like many of you, wherever we go, we look up the Jewish community and see if we can pop in for a Shabbat. And we had joined a Shabbat dinner and met people in the Jewish community in our visits. And I, not only did we love the lifestyle, but we loved the Jewish community and the people there. And even though I was looking to have a sabbatical and take time off when we moved, I also was looking beyond that year of sabbatical. And we found out that the Jewish community here was open for leadership. There's been an organized Jewish community in the Flathead Valley for almost 40 years. And it started with a Jewish woman just putting a little ad in the Mountain Trader. It's just one of these papers that has like little advertisements and classified ads. And she just said, if you're Jewish and you want to get together, call this number. And they had a Shabbat dinner, and that was the start of the community. When we moved here, there were two communities. The origin community was Bet Harim congregation based in Kalispell, and then there was a small group that had broken off and was in Whitefish. But both communities were growing tired. They had had a rabbi for a while, but Rabbi Alan Sucher was retired for a few years. And so when we moved, I volunteered and helped the community discuss how we could come together as one community and organize. And in 2000, so we moved in 2014, and in 2015, we founded Glacier Jewish Community, B'nai Shalom, right? As is keeping with the tradition of naming synagogues, we had Shalom in the title to show that we were all coming back together and happily merged. And we really are the Jewish presence in the Flathead Valley. There is a Chabad community that just moved in a little over a year ago. But our community, of course, is the one that is welcoming and open to all Jews and all Jewish families, interfaith families as well. When I came to the congregation, they had a tradition of Hanukkah parties, High Holy Day gatherings, and maybe a Shabbat dinner every once in a while. So we really expanded the activities. We have Shabbat services at my home once a month. We do many socials. This is a social in a brewery that actually members own, Kalispell Brewing Company. This is our annual Shabbat-barbecue. We always have a Shabbat. Sundown's really, really late, so we can barbecue on Friday night before Shabbat starts on Whitefish Lake. This is a picture of Purim when I came, and I expanded the offerings of Jewish life and of Jewish community, and the community had never really done Purim. And we do a great Purim now. So if you visit around Purim time, you should look us up. We have a regular Passover, Seder. I also added observing Shavuot, Yom HaShoah, Yom HaZikaron, Yom HaAtzmaut. So really have also tried to expand the community's exposure to traditional Jewish observance and the Israeli holidays. And then also expanded the educational offerings. So this picture on the left is my little study group. I had a little Hebrew school study group. It was these 3 boys. That was 1 year. I primarily do one-on-one study with kids. This young man had his bar mitzvah at the end of that year, and I'm still tutoring him. So I primarily more do one-on-one study. I have done classes. We have a monthly discussion group that meets in local diner and coffee shop and now meets online. And also what I've put a lot of time and work into is interfaith work. And this picture up above is actually a course that that I taught in partnership with 2 ministers in town. And we did a interfaith Lenten series on the experience of crossing the wilderness and Passover, and a little bit about Easter. So, and then when I came, I also started a tradition that now we do annually of bringing Holocaust survivors to the Flathead Valley. People around here never met a Holocaust survivor. There are no, as far as I know, maybe Bert and Paul know differently, but as far as I know, there are no Holocaust survivors right now living in the state of Montana. So I have a relationship with the Seattle, the Holocaust Center for Humanity in Seattle. And we've brought out survivors to tell their story. And of course, we also do a lot of social action work. So we do Habitat for Humanity. In the summer, we volunteer there. And this picture on the right is what we're involved in right now. The COVID-19 pandemic is really affecting certain communities more than others. And the tribal nations are really struggling and suffering. They're trying to protect the health of their residents and their nation, and they also are struggling with procuring food. When the borders were closed, one of the Blackfeet communities in the city of Bab was no longer able to go where they usually went for groceries, which was across the border into Canada. So they were having trouble securing groceries. They really couldn't afford to be driving back and forth down to the Flathead Valley. And so we partnered with the local church, and we have been bringing them firewood for the first month. And then every 2 weeks, we bring groceries or surplus potatoes. And we're helping distribute about 10,000 pounds at a time potatoes to different tribal nations that we can drive to and access. So we're trying to be good neighbors and good partners. We are a united Jewish community, but we also are interwoven with the Montana community. So we'll go back in time a bit. When I moved, I'd never heard of this guy. This is Richard Spencer. And I came to be aware of him because in the first year that I moved, there were going to be some protests in a city council meeting because Richard Spencer was building a building downtown, and people believed he was going to be moving his offices from DC to Montana. People protested, made it very clear that, of course, he had the right to build wherever he wanted, but people were not happy about him running his white supremacist, white nationalist, what he calls alt-right movement from Montana. He sort of went away for a while, but with the rise of Trump and with Trump's election, Spencer put himself on the map. This clip went viral of him giving a talk at his convention in DC and a Nazi salute. I don't know if you remember the Hail Trump, Hail Our People, Hail Victory. People in our town started really getting upset because he kept being announced as Richard Spencer from Whitefish, Montana. And we were afraid that he would be seen as representing our town. So the town of Whitefish rallied together and passed a proclamation against hatred and bigotry and supporting people of all faiths and all national origins and sexual identities. And we've really tried, the town has really tried to have a public presence, strongly speaking out against hate. And this Love Lives Here sign, Love Lives Here in the Flathead Valley, is our human rights organization that continually fights back against hate. Again, as all this was happening, people were, the Spencers did build a building downtown, and it was a business, there were two up businesses on the bottom, and it was a vacation rental. And people in the town were getting really upset and going into those businesses and saying, hey, why are you supporting the Spencers? And actually, Richard Spencer's mother, Sherry, reached out to this woman, Tanya Gersh, a member of our congregation and the only female Jewish realtor in town. Sherry reached out to her and talked to Tanya about selling her building. Unfortunately, what happened next was that little bit of truth was turned upside down and promoted in the hate community as the Jews are targeting Richard Spencer's mother for harassment and extortion, and you must take action. So in December 2016, this man, Andrew Anglin, who runs the Daily Stormer, the largest neo-Nazi website in the world, he called for people to attack Tanya, to attack myself, to attack Alan Setcher and his wife Ina. That's the retired rabbi in town. And they attacked us by sending hateful tweets, phone calls, text messages, and generally harassing us online through their discussion boards. December 16th was a Friday. Anglin called for the attacks and posted that on the Daily Stormer. On the 17th, Richard Spencer retweeted Anglin's post. And then on the 18th, this is David Duke tweeting a picture of me wearing my kippah and another leader in our Jewish community being interviewed for CNN. After those 3 days of activity, the activity on the internet, the hate activity just really exploded. And I started getting calls from the Anti-Defamation League, from Southern Poverty Law Center, and from SCAN, Secure Community Network. They were calling to ask us, were we okay? What was going on? And how could they help? Interesting thing was, we had no idea what was going on. No one had ever experienced anything like this. And this was hundreds and hundreds of phone calls, texts, and tweets and images threatening our community. These are a few of the images. These were not sent to us. These were posted in their discussion boards, and then they post them and spread them all around. Yeah, we're burning in the fire. They went back to my old congregation and took pictures. They know the law, and they're very clear not to use what has been considered in the past harassing language. Shut it down is code, for a threat. So they also use Holocaust imagery, and they make clear that they want the Jewish community to be destroyed. And it was all incredibly scary to us. Again, these 3 organizations became our support team, and they worked to help us coordinate with law enforcement to make sure that we were safe. They coordinated with local police, FBI, Homeland Security. Southern Poverty Law Center helped us learn how to collect evidence. When you receive hateful messages, your first impulse is to delete them because they're disgusting. And they taught us how to collect everything because they needed it for evidence. The harassment against myself and the other rabbinic family slowed after just a couple days, and a week, and Tanya and toward our community, and then toward business owners in our town who they decided they thought were Jewish. That all continued for 2 months. What happened was, so remember, December 16th was the first call for an attack against us. Then Andrew Anglin was getting a lot of press and attention from his attack on us, and he found that Montana was an open carry state, and so he announced that a few weeks later, for Martin Luther King Day, there would be an armed Nazi march through Whitefish. And this was the visual that he created, and they all passed around to promote this march. It's quite disgusting, and the face on the left is the 13-year-old son of the Jewish realtor. So what I want to look, what should you know about that attack? It really was the largest cyber terrorist attack that they'd ever seen in the country. It was the first of a trend, and unfortunately. But what I want to emphasize is that we learned a lot of positive lessons from this experience that we try to promote. First, our community practiced, and I preach and teach spiritual resistance. You know, this happened the weekend before Hanukkah, and people were very scared to come out and come to a public gathering, but they did. And we had our Hanukkah party. We did hire armed security, and from then on, we have had armed security at all of our events. But you know, we realized that no one could take away from us our faith, our tradition, our practices, and our rituals, and bringing light to the darkness was our way of counteracting the experience of that hatred. We also experienced profound love, an outpouring of love and support. Our neighbors, the people in Whitefish, put out a call, I found out later, and at our local community center, people brought gifts, and then they created these baskets of love that they brought to Tanya and her family, to my family, to Rabbi Setcher's family. They even brought one to Sherry Spencer. You know, this is like homemade soup, food from the farm, homemade cookies. There were just beautiful gifts and cards and letters of support. Letters started pouring in from around the country and around the world, first from Jewish communities, because word spread on Facebook through my Facebook posts, and then just really from people of all faiths expressing their support and taking a stand against hatred. And I really just want to say, the power of the written note. We've really lost that art with texts and email, and we received, you know, loads and loads of letters, and we felt so alone and so threatened with these attacks. But then we would open up these letters and feel love and feel cared for and feel a sense of at least protection. People in our state also rallied. This is a graphic that was sign that was created by Empower Montana and Missoula, published in papers across the state. And people hung these signs in their windows, the windows of their cars, their businesses. They were all around Whitefish, but I even saw them when I drove to Missoula to visit, and I think they were around the state. And then the government leaders stood up for us. This is our governor, Steve Bullock, and his wife. They're posting the sign, I think, in his offices. And the governor over and over again put op-eds in the Montana papers condemning hatred and anti-Semitism, and over again saying this is not the Montana way. At that time, even, we had, this is our Republican and our Democratic senator, together with the Republican representative our Attorney General and our governor, they all together signed a statement against hatred and bigotry, against anti-Semitism, supporting the Jewish community and the community of Whitefish. So it was pretty profound to see the state leaders. Also, you'll see in the headline, tribal leaders, the Confederated Tribes of the Salish and Kootenai as well, put out a statement of support, and that that was profound for me, that a community that also is oppressed was taking a stand for a minority community, and it was pretty powerful. So we learned that people need to stand up, and our 2 weeks before Martin Luther King Day, we had already had like a community rally planned called Love Not Hate. We were going to be emphasizing the diversity of our town, and it ended up to be this opportunity for people in the Flathead Valley and around the state to just stand up and show that hatred and bigotry and anti-Semitism were not welcome. And this is a picture of 100 people outdoors in negative 15-degree temperature for 3 hours to listen to speeches and music, watch dance performances, and make sure people knew that hate was not welcome in the Flathead Valley or in Montana. The last lesson I just want to emphasize, and I advise different counties when hate people are coming to their town. What we learned was you don't need to go stand in front of the bad guys and face off with them. What we encourage people to do is to promote their values and celebrate the values of the town that are a force of good against hatred. And this actually was the theme of a party that we held on Martin Luther King Day. No Nazis, no Nazis with flags or guns showed up on Martin Luther King Day. We had a town party. We had it indoors in a place that we knew was safe, away from where they claimed their march was going to be. We served matzo ball soup the Friday before Martin Luther King Day. Volunteers came to our food pantry and soup kitchen. I taught them how to make matzo balls. We made chicken soup and served 350 bowls of soup on Martin Luther King Day. And what was really beautiful was it became this neighborhood event for Jews and non-Jews and neighbors to just sit and learn from each other and get to know each other and support each other. So it was pretty powerful. And last, we did fight back in the courts. Tanya sued Andrew Anglin, the founder and editor of the Daily Stormer. And that case in federal court in July of last year, 2019, Tanya and Southern Poverty Law Center won the case against Anglin, and the judge adopted a recommendation that Anglin must pay more than $14 million in damages to Tanya Gersh. She's probably not going to see any of that money. The ruling was most important for its symbolic value and the capacity then for us to be able to shut down the Daily Stormer, which I think we're close to doing. But I'd really just prefer to end back with modern times. And we're celebrating 5 years of being Glacier Jewish Community. We're celebrating a community that's filled with young families and filled with people who live here part-time and people who live here full-time. And, you know, even in this time of a pandemic, we're hoping to take advantage of where we live and start to have some gatherings with social distancing but enjoying the outdoors. These 2 pictures with all the trees we had a congregational retreat last year. And then I just couldn't end without letting you know that we have a whole bunch of rabbis in Montana. We have, this is Rabbi Lori Franklin in Missoula. This is Rabbi Alan Setcher, who is retired and who lives here. And then we have a rabbinic organization called MAOR, the Montana Association of Rabbis. Actually, the of us are talking about how we can do some sort of statewide High Holy Day observance this year in anticipation of difficulty meeting in person. So we're always talking and working together and sharing ideas. This picture is from when the 3 of us are participating for the conversion of 3 people in my community. So It's a great Jewish community. It's a great place to live, and it's a great place to visit when it's not a pandemic. So maybe next year, if you're passing through, please always look us up. I think I'm the main kosher meal in town, so we love having people over and sharing life out here with anyone who passes through. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. This really is a beautiful portrayal into your community. And yes, next year, definitely in hopes to come visit. So with that said, why don't we go ahead and turn it over to Bert, who is Paul's partner. And he's going to talk about Bob Marshall Wilderness, and which was started by a Jewish man. I know he's covering at least one of those points, but go ahead. I can make you, are you co-host? Make co-host.
And then we'll answer questions after.
Yes, we will. So, pardon me, the phone in the background, but Bert, are you good?
Here we go, yes.
Are you able to share? Okay.
Okay, I am Bert Chessin. I was born in Missoula, Montana, in 1950. My parents had come to Montana in 1949. My father, and I'm going to, through the pictures, tell sort of about Montana, but also with my own personal Jewish eyes, will share a little bit with you. And a little disclaimer, I am not on the Montana Tourist Board. These are just kind of super fantastic pictures. Thank you, Francine, for sharing some personal ones. I didn't pull that together, but I'm going to talk about these places, these images, really in terms of my own experience and my Jewish experience. So maybe this will be something that you will enjoy, and there should be time for questions as well. So Francine has already put up a map of the state of Montana. The reason for putting this one up is you see all the pink red areas are the reservations, the Native American communities in Montana, and they actually are very important. Montana has the second or third highest fraction of our population is actually Native American. I think either Arizona or New Mexico is higher, but you also, just a little personal thing, in Western Montana, there's only one. This is the Flathead Reservation. They are the Salish Indians, and Francine already showed you Flathead Lake. Missoula is right here to the south, so we sort of bookend Flathead Lake and the Flathead Reservation between Missoula and Whitefish, Montana. You can see it's a big state. And I will point out here is the Bob Marshall Wilderness. We'll come to that in a little bit. It's the largest. We always have to qualify everything in Montana because Alaska's bigger and everything. But in the continental United States, Montana plays a particular role in terms of outdoors, wilderness, environmental ethics kinds of issues. And most of the Jews in Montana also line up with that quite well, despite the gold rush days when the merchants were there to fuel to provide for the miners. This is a geological map of Montana. The only reason I show this is Montana is actually quite complex and interesting geologically. And when you see these red areas, the red are the kinds of formations that tend to have the ores. So Butte is down here, and because of the igneous kinds of rocks and the veins of gold and silver and copper and all that line igneous rocks. And you can see there's quite a bit here in Western Montana. That's a little bit of the reason for the mining that goes on in Montana. Okay, so I'm gonna start with the wildflowers. Montana does have beautiful areas. This is typical. This is the kinds of wildflowers that do grow here around in the Missoula, in the western part of the state. And one of the other reasons for showing this is that my father was a botanist, a professor of botany at the University of Montana. My father grew up in the Bronx of New York City, and he always he talked about the Catskills and the love for out of doors, and he fell in love with Montana. He also was one of, not atypical. I think there's a good number of Jews who are in Montana who are getting away from the cities and communing and finding spiritual values here in Montana. My father was very Jewish. He spoke Yiddish. He taught Yiddish. He grew up in a very active political family. But he had conflicts with his Jewish background. It was the source in part being his father owned a grocery store, and what the family was embarrassed by the rabbi of the synagogue they attended because they sold some non-kosher foods in their grocery store in the Bronx. And so the family became sort of turned against the more institutionalized Jewish religion. But my father found his Judaism really here in Montana by being able to enjoy the wildflowers and enjoy the beauty and enjoy the people. As Francine has said, Montanans tend to be very warm and generous of nature. And so this is why I put in this picture. So between Missoula and heading north, one of the scenes that I am always awestruck by is when I come from Missoula and head north towards Flathead Lake. Flathead Lake is a treasure in the Treasure State. And this set of mountains, the Mission Mountains, every time I come up over a hill and I see, you are given a shock of seeing the Mission Mountains set against this broad valley. They're called the Mission Mountains. I'm always awestruck. It has never died. So also in that area is the National Bison Range, and being a symbol of the United States, the bison, we have them here in Western Montana. And so it was a part, when I was growing up, regularly we would drive up to the Bison Range and we'd have a picnic. And there were bison around and plenty of deer who were becoming quite domesticated and wanting food from us. But this is actually a natural rift valley that extends south of Missoula and goes all the way up by Glacier Park up into Canada. And the Mission Mountains are called the Alps of Montana, of the Mountain West. And Francine also had, there's some duplication here. Here, this is Flathead Lake. Flathead Lake is again, a natural wonder, a large natural freshwater lake in Montana, qualifying it, saying that it's actually the largest natural freshwater lake west of the Mississippi. And so many summer homes, people do their kayaking. It was a ritual for my family to go up to Flathead Lake. We were very fortunate that had friends who had a cabin, a summer home on Flathead Lake. And so we went there every summer, celebrated, swam, understanding that the water is glacier fed. It comes via near a Kalispell Whitefish and heads down and fills up this lake. And it's quite an extraordinary thing. Now I include a shot of a lake in Glacier National Park. The amazing thing is it looks like almost like we have a floating mattress in the air, but actually she's on the water. It is so clear. The reason I bring up this picture is my recollections of being in Montana is also, in addition to Flathead Lake, going to Glacier. The water is so extremely cold. I remember being in lakes, the only way to be in the lake was to be on an air mattress. To actually be in the water for any extent extent of time was bone chilling. But this is the way you could enjoy the water in Montana, especially in Glacier in the middle of the summer. It's quite spectacular. This is, I'm almost positive, is East Glacier on one of the Medicine Lakes in Glacier National Park. The Blackfoot River is a river made famous by Norman Maclean, and a river runs through it. I grew up fishing on the Blackfoot River. My father had his favorite spot to go fishing, and I had my bar mitzvah in the summer of 1963, so I'm telling you how old I am. What did I get for as a bar mitzvah gift? My first fly fishing pole. So I am I connect my Judaism with my love of fly fishing and my love of the country here. And so within 10 minutes, I can, even less, but even in 10 minutes, I can be fly fishing on a wonderful trout stream in Western Montana, and particularly the Blackfoot River. Also, what did I get for my bar mitzvah as a gift? I actually had a double bar mitzvah. Not that we had so many kids and we had to double up, but they're so rare that the families came together and said, let's do a double one so we can bring in a rabbi from somewhere else to perform for it. And as the gift, because of the other family, I got to spend a good part of a week on a ranch down in the Bitterroot. And so I learned a lot about riding horses and that was another bar mitzvah gift and part of my education here in Western Montana. Now, I recall a day, this is Rock Creek, Montana, a blue ribbon trout stream, about 30 miles east of Missoula. I remember a day with my father where we caught trout all day, and it is embedded, it is etched in my mind of my experience of being in Montana and being with my dad, sharing a fundamental Montana value, that is the beauty, the purity, the love of what Montana has to offer. And so that was that. The other place, this is the Bitterroot Valley. This again is quite sort of idealized. The Bitterroot Valley is south of Missoula. It had, as you can see, it's every 5 miles or so, there's another canyon, and all these there's streams coming out of all this into the Bitterroot River. With my father, I must have fished in almost every one of those canyons. They are beautiful. The fish are not big, but they're the native cutthroat trout that are native to Western Montana. This is just a part of who I am. Here we are now in the Bob Marshall Wilderness. Bob Marshall, like my father, but even more so, as a New York boy, his family had a cabin up on a lake, Lake George, in the Adirondacks. And when he was a kid growing up, he loved to hike, and he and his brother spent a lot of time with an outdoor guidesman there in New York, hiking all over. They became the first people to scale all 46 of the highest peaks in the Adirondacks. And Bob Marshall his father was a very successful civil rights lawyer, and actually was a judge and was committed to environmental things, funded the forestry school at Syracuse University. But Bob, and very well known, Bob's father, Lewis Marshall, was one of the most prominent Jews at the turn of the last century. And so Bob grew up in a very Jewish setting. Bob found his spirituality by being in the wilderness and being in the woods. So he started even in the late 20s. He was born in 1901, and even in the late 20s, all the way to 39. He died very early, at the age of 38, while on a train back east. He went back and forth all the time. He was hired by the Forest Service to look at wild country, and he and then followed by his brother were really two of the main movers in establishing wilderness areas in Montana. So Bob came out here, was in Missoula, was in Idaho, was all over. He spent time in Alaska. But when the Wilderness Act was passed in 1964, immediately they established this large wilderness area named after Bob Marshall. And so Bob Marshall's legends include he would hike, or not just hike and run. He was known to have covered 50 miles in a day in the mountains. He would hike quickly up the mountains and then run down and then just keep moving. He never stopped. He was a monster hiker. Anyway, that's Bob Marshall. There's a story of Bob Marshall on Yom Kippur going up and taking a hike up in the woods. Came to a mountaintop. He only covered about 5 miles that day. That was barely a warm-up for Bob Marshall. He spent about 3 hours meditating on top of a mountain. And he said, that was the most spiritual Yom Kippur I've ever experienced. It's far superior to sitting on hard benches in a synagogue and listening to droning, boring sermons about the Day of Atonement. So he captures actually in ways spirit of some of the kinds of people who end up in Montana, maybe having Jewish backgrounds, but they find their Judaism in different ways. This is a famous little painting, a connection between Montana and Jews. A mid-19th century Helena Jew was Louis Kaufman. Started out as a butcher, was successful, ended up buying a ranch to help supply his butcher store. On that ranch one winter, the famous winter that was so brutally long and cold, snowy, that wiped out many, many, many cattle operations, was a young artist by the name of Charlie Russell. And when Louis Kaufman from afar was asking the ranch, how is it going? How are the cattle doing? The response was this postcard that Charlie Russell sent back saying, waiting for a Chinook. His cattle were wiped out. A Chinook in Montana, and it's part of the world, is a warm wind that melts the snow. It's a phenomenon based upon the movement of air over the Rocky Mountains, and they warm up when they head east. But that's what a Chinook is. This is Butte, Montana. Butte, Montana used to be much larger, but this pit, it was successful with underground mining. And in 1900, there were 3 synagogues, 2 Orthodox and 1 Reform in Butte, Montana. Had a very thriving Jewish business community. And it's very small now. There are just a few number of families. But this pit, known as the Berkeley Pit, it's almost filled up, and they now have only in the last couple of years figured out how to drain it, to remove it. It has such high levels of heavy metals. Birds land on it and they die. And they've come up with all kinds of strategies to get rid of the birds, and but they are fixing it. But Butte is really established, and I will say, from my own personal review of Jewish history, there's a writer who came, nobody knows about him, but there's a writer who came out of Butte by the name of Myron Brinnig. Brinnig wrote a lot, and he was claimed to be the first great American writer who didn't write in Yiddish, those that came out of the Eastern European tradition. His stories about Butte and his family are absolutely fantastic. Only one of them is available in print anymore, but I always feel a special connection to Butte, in part because of Myron Brinnig. Here's the Helena synagogue, modern. The onion domey kinds of top that it had when it was first built have been removed. one of the reasons for bringing up this synagogue is Temple Emmanuel. Two reasons, actually. A young rabbi was hired in 1890 for this synagogue. His name was Schumann. And Schumann went on to become the rabbi of the big Reform rabbi synagogue in New York City. So Temple Emmanuel in Manhattan had a rabbi for many, many years who started out in Helena, Montana. The other reason I bring this up is that I had my bar mitzvah in 1963. The Helena Jewish congregation really died in the 30s during the Depression. The people were leaving, they couldn't keep it together. There was a wonderful family. The present Torah we have at Har Shalom in Missoula came from Helena, and it came from Helena for my bar mitzvah in 1963. So I have a particular connection with the Helena Jewish community and actually some of the families. But this was the synagogue, and we were given a personal tour by Frieda Fliegelman. There's a whole story, and you'll read my book in about 5 years, and you can hear about Frieda Fliegelman here. And here's my last one is Missoula. It is the town where a river runs through it. Here's in the foreground is the University of Montana. Here's the downtown section. Missoula is celebrating we have our sesquicentennial, 150 years since Jews settled in Missoula. In 1870, a fellow by the name of Jacob Leiser came, and some of the early Jews really helped, similar to Butte and similar to Helena, helped establish a strong civic-minded business community in those cities, and the Jews played their role in Missoula as well. And that's really what I have for you today.
Thank you so much, Bert. That was lovely. And there's something really special, I mean, with this whole presentation about entering Shabbat, having taken in these images. I can't even begin to imagine what it's like to be surrounded by that daily. So with that said, does anybody have any questions? I see there's been a couple questions. Okay. We got Mark Wolf.
Hi, Rabbi Roston. I'm really looking forward to come visiting you next year. My cousins live in Whitefish. My cousins are Helen and Cody White. My cousin Helen my cousin Helen grew up in New Rochelle, New York. And Helen's parents loved it there so much that they built this gorgeous log cabin that I've only seen pictures of, like on Helen and Cody's property. And I've seen pictures of this amazing Israeli flag that flies next to the American flag on their house. And they come there frequently to see their daughter and son-in-law and grandkids. And I just hear so many wonderful things about Whitefish, how gorgeous it is. Cody is a United States Forest Service firefighter, and Helen is just a wonderful young lady, and the kids are great. And we'd have been there sooner, except for all this going on, and we're just looking so forward to being there. And I so enjoyed this very much. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. I do. It's very neat how small the Jewish world is. A number of you have connections to the Glacier Jewish community, and that's really a beautiful thing. I saw a few questions that came up that I wanted to answer for you all. I forgot to tell you, we're a synagogue without walls. We don't have a synagogue building. We meet in my home once a month, and then we meet around the valley in all different places, hotels, breweries, diners, coffee houses, and of course people's homes. So we can be more nimble, and it works for the community right now. Someone asked about kosher meat. There are Hebrew National hot dogs in the grocery store. We can drive about 3.5 hours, 4 hours if you stop and rest, to Spokane, where that's the nearest Trader Joe's. And then I also found there's a kosher grocery store in Seattle, and I can put an order in online. They'll freeze the meat and the order and whitefish salad, because no one knows what whitefish salad is here. And so I get my whitefish salad and my kosher chicken and beef, and they just put it on an Alaska Air flight, and I go to the airport to pick up my groceries, my kosher groceries. So that's how we get kosher meat. When I started in 2015, we had a mailing list of 75 people, and now we have a mailing list of over 200 households. And then someone asked about the Rabbi Goes West. Yes, you'll see pictures of my rabbinic colleagues, and I am also featured because I was another rabbi who went west. The dissension that you saw was the dissension between Chabad and non-Orthodox rabbis. That's common in every city in America. And there's no animosity, like we all, can come together at certain times. But we often have different goals, and we have different, yes, we have different goals. So it was very difficult during those attacks. They didn't really reach out. They weren't supportive. And as I said in the film, they, raised money from the event, and that was very difficult to experience. But we all come together when we need to. So.
Okay. Great. Well, I know what I'm going to be watching this weekend. Erva Runs Through It. That is one of my favorite films.
Yes.
Oh, so good. But let's everybody thank our panelists. They put a lot of time into this, so really appreciate that and giving us such an amazing window. So before you leave, real quick, just for the future, so this Sunday we have our film group that meets. We screened, or you'd need to screen beforehand, Dirty Dancing, and we're talking about the cat skills and the film. We're having a couple people who worked in the cat skills in the 50s and 60s, and so if you'd like to join that. On Monday, we are going to Louisville, Kentucky, and we'll be joined by Jerry Abramson. It's going to be an honor. He was mayor for many years, lieutenant governor, head of all the mayors around the nation. There's like a board of rabbis, a board of mayors. Amazing human. Maybe bring some Kentucky bourbon with you, because we're going to be talking about Jews in the bourbon industry a bunch. So Filsner Historical Society. And the timing for that one on Monday is, so it's 11 a.m. California time. And then 2 o'clock, sorry, my bird's not working, 2 o'clock Florida time. So we hope to see you there. Following that, we'll see Alaska, Hawaii, and then Salt Lake City. We will conclude there. So thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful Shabbat, and hopefully we'll see you Sunday and Monday and the rest of the days. So take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Shabbat
you.
Shalom.
Shabbat
Thank
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Thank you, Bert, Paul, Rabbi.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat shalom to
shalom.
everyone.
Have a nice weekend.
Have a wonderful weekend.